Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at the very last iteration of the French Berthier rifle. This is the M34 Modifié 1934 model, and this is the French military adaptation of the Berthier to the new 7.5x54 rimless cartridge. So when World War I ended, the French realized they finally had the opportunity to get rid of the 8mm Lebel cartridge. Its rim and its extreme taper made it very difficult to adapt to, especially double-stack box magazines. Wasn't good for self-loading rifles. It was a wildly obsolete cartridge, and they got rid of it. They didn't get rid of it. They introduced a replacement. How about that? And that was the 7.5x58 rimless cartridge. It's actually pretty similar to 308 NATO, to be honest. They introduced this in 1924. Had a few problems with it, interchangeability issues with 8 Mauser, so they changed it slightly in 1939 to the 7.5x54, which is the cartridge that today remains the 7.5 French, and developed a light machine gun right at the same time to use it. That was the Châtellerault model of 1924/29. The light machine gun had been deemed the highest priority new small arm to replace after World War I. And they got that thing done pretty well, and it was actually a really good gun. And I actually have a video coming on the Châtellerault, so in a couple weeks you'll be able to see that. However, once the cartridge is there, now they can turn to, what do we do next? What can we upgrade next? And the answer was rifles. So early in this process, in 1927, they adopt, or formally try, a 7.5 conversion of the Lebel rifle. That's the M27. And it doesn't really go very well. It's a difficult and expensive conversion. And after a couple years, people realize, you know what, maybe this wasn't a great idea. I bet it'd be easier to do the Berthier. So they switched to converting the Berthier to 7.5, because after the war, they've got oodles of these things lying around as well. And the Châtellerault and the St Etienne arsenals both put together prototypes. Châtellerault came up with a single stack magazine design, kind of like the early 89 and 91 Mausers. St Etienne came up with a double stack magazine design, and St Etienne won the competition. So the trials for this were 1932 and 33. The pattern was approved in 1934, and by 1936, St Etienne had begun building these rifles. In collaboration, they got some help on small parts from the Thule arsenal. Châtellerault didn't have anything to do with it. They were busy doing other things, presumably making light machine guns. At any rate, production of this actually ran side by side with the new MAS 36 bolt-action rifle. So they had two side-by-side rifles that really didn't interchange any parts, but they operated pretty much the same way. And a total of about 63,000 of these rifles were manufactured before World War II broke out. And it's a lot more than people might suspect. This wasn't really so much a trials gun as this was just a low production conversion that would have been much more widely applied had the war not taken place. By the time the war started, the French had something like 150 or 200,000 MAS 36 rifles, and they had 63,000 of these. So something like a quarter of the 7.5 rifles in French inventory when the Germans invaded were these guys. So a little more had a bigger role in history than a lot of people might recognize. These rifles typically were issued to units that were defending static positions, like the Maginot Line, and in fact a lot of these were captured by the Germans, and they were designated the Gewehr 241F, and there are some pictures out there of German troops using these M34 Berthier rifle conversions. Now, this I recognize, and you probably will too, that this doesn't really look a whole lot like this, but there's more similarity than you might expect. So let's take a closer look at how this conversion was done. The most important element of the M34 Berthier is, of course, its cartridge. So there were two versions of the cartridge. There was ball C and ball D. C was for rifles and D was for light machine guns. This is the C, which is what the rifle was designed to use, of course. Packaged on very typical Mauser-style stripper clips, although interestingly, the French clips were made of aluminum, so a little bit lighter, I guess. And of course, you can see the dramatic difference in shape between the two cartridges. This, very easy to use in a modern box-fed firearm, box magazine-fed firearm, because it doesn't have this taper and giant rim to get in the way and cause problems. And right off the bat, you can see that there is a stripper clip guide built into the receiver now of these Berthier conversions. So put a clip right in there and quickly and easily load it just like a Mauser or other Mauser style. Of course, once you have the magazine loaded, you do want a way to empty it without having to just cycle every round through the chamber, just for administrative and safety reasons. That was very easy on the original Berthiers because of their clip loading. On the M34, it was given a detachable floor plate. You'll see the same thing, not the same mechanism, but the same idea on the MAS 36. So push in with a cartridge and pull back, and then you can dump out all of the ammo. At a glance, the M34 really looks like a much more modern pattern of rifle than the Berthier long rifles. However, if we look at the details, you'll see they really are, in fact, conversions. So the front end of the receiver here is the same. They have added a thumb cutout for loading stripper clips to the M34, but you can see these distinctive flats on the back of the receiver. The bolts are basically the same. The M34 is still hindered by this the screw that you have to take out and remove the bolt head in order to take the bolt out of the gun, but that's an artifact of being a conversion. The bolt head itself was modified for, well, to hold a smaller case head and to have a different pattern of ejector, as necessitated by the change from rimmed to rimless ammo. And we have a stripper clip guide cut into the receiver here now, which obviously wasn't necessary on the clip loading Berthiers. Looking at the right side of the receivers, you can see that, again, not a whole lot has changed. It was convenient that the Berthier receiver was wide enough to accommodate a double stack magazine because of the extra bits, the extra width required for those Mannlicher style clips. So we still have the same disassembly method. This screw holds in the trigger guard and magazine, so we'll take that out in just a moment. The sights are different on the M34, but the nose cap is identical. And so the M34 is designed to take the same pattern of spike bayonet, like that. Same pattern that was on the Lebel and the Berthier long rifles. So this fits right on there. By the way, this is one of several indications that it was the long rifles that were being converted and not the carbines, because the carbines used a blade style of bayonet, where the long rifles used this spike bayonet. And last of the major external components, the sights changed. So the rear sight on the M34 is now a very typical leaf style sight with markings from 200 out to 900 meters. You no longer have the battle sight 0 flipped over like that. And however, actually the handguards are the same. They're the same pattern of handguards, so they can make them on the same tooling, and they just have a change in the cutout for the rear sight here. But other than that, the little reinforcements here are identical, the length is identical, and these front sling rings are identical. Interestingly though, the front sights, they kind of went the other direction. So this really big front post was adopted in 1915, and on the M34 they went back to a narrow front sight blade for potentially more precise shooting but slower sight acquisition. I should mention there was also a cavalry version of the 34 made. It had a hooked style of stacking rod like this, taken from the Indochina version of the Berthier. Instead of the straight rod, it doesn't seem like that would make all that much difference, but there it is. And then instead of having a sling swivel on the bottom of the stock, down here, the cavalry version had a sling bar in the side, like some of the cavalry pattern early Berthier carbines. However, it seems like only a very small number of those were made. It might have been a separate pattern that never went into full-scale production. At most, a fraction of the total production was that cavalry pattern. And there was also a 1937 model that was, in theory, going to be a conversion of Indochina rifles to 7.5. Those never got past the prototype stage. Oh, and there was also a 1940 plan to develop a semi-automatic conversion of the Berthier that also, I don't think that even got to prototype stage. That one ended pretty quickly. To take out the bolt, as on any Berthier or Lebel, we have to remove this screw right there. Once that is out, then we can rotate the bolt head down, and the bolt head separates from the bolt body. They both come out. Typical of French rifles, there was no manual safety on this rifle. You would carry it with the chamber empty and only load it when commanded to, when you were ready to fire. And then we have two screws to remove the fire control group and magazine. One here at the back, there, and one up here. This is part screw and part pin, really. Once that comes out, the trigger group is going to start pushing out under spring tension. And then we can just pull this out. It latches with this hook over that bar right up in there. And there is our magazine and fire control group. Standard double stack follower there. And you can clearly see the similarities to a regular 1907/15 Berthier trigger assembly. All they basically did was take out this bit and put in a box magazine shell there. So while these are very similar and a lot of the small parts are interchangeable, these frames were not reused. So you can see that this comes off right here and it had to be replaced with a completely new part. That's the sort of thing that made this an expensive conversion. Not nearly as simple as, you know, a typical conversion when you're changing from one cartridge to another. If they're both rimless with similar bolt faces, all you have to do is basically put in a new barrel and maybe alter the bolt head a little bit. With this, they were replacing the entire feed system here. The barrels had to be replaced, of course, because of the new cartridge, the new caliber, dimension of the bullet. The stocks had to be made new because the rifle was a different length. There was a lot of work that went into converting these Berthiers. Well, despite that cost, they did make like 63,000 of them. This is a 62,000 and change serial number, so it's one of the very last ones that was done, and it is an F prefix serial number. All of these M34 conversions were in the F serial number range. Unlike, for example, the Lebel carbines, when we get to those conversions, converted Lebels were given the same serial number as the original Lebel. On these guys, the 8mm Berthier gave up its serial number, didn't have one. Which I suspect is because on the Berthiers, the 8mm ones, the serial number would have been on the barrel. The barrels were all being scrapped, and they wanted to have the serial number exposed without having to cut a hole in the handguard like they'd done after 1916. So new serial numbers on the top of the receiver for these. A new model designation on the side of the receiver as well. This is now the Model 1907-15 M34, so modification of 1934, manufactured by Mauser. And pretty much the first French rifle to have its caliber actually marked on it. These are marked 7.5, just to make sure that you don't try and use 8mm Lebel ammunition in them. The bolts on these rifles are serial numbered to match, as are the stocks. However, you will not have the standard round military acceptance mark for whatever reason. Probably in part because they were really in a rush to get these things adopted, because, as with the Mauser 36, they didn't really put them into substantial production until it was like almost too late and war had almost broken out. So that's where you would typically see a round acceptance stamp with a nice month and year of acceptance, but nothing on these guys. Well, that pretty much wraps up the history of the Berthier rifle. I hope you guys enjoyed the series. I hope you learned something, hopefully a lot of things, about what I consider to be a really interesting sequence of rifle development. What's really cool about the Berthier is it was initially designed as a cavalry carbine, and then it kind of got pushed into service for every other conceivable use, before finally being converted even to a completely different cartridge, different style of cartridge, different style of magazine. Everything by the end was completely different. So it was a rifle that served literally everywhere. These were used in 2 world wars, numerous colonial conflicts. I think it's a fascinating rifle. Anyway, we will continue with later on with some other explorations into French rifles. We still have the Lebel family to look at, as well as the Mauser 36, and then the semi-auto rifles that France did. But in the meantime, I think we're going to take a break for a series of auction house videos that include a whole bunch of cool stuff. So this is the last you'll see of the Berthier for a little while. If you would like to keep it on your mind, we actually extended the sale of these awesome shirts for 1 more week, so they'll be on sale until August 7th. Had a bunch of people asking us to do that. So if you would like one of these, I know I said this like the last time, but this is, in fact, just about your last chance. There's a link in the description text where you can head over to the merchandise shop and pick one up if you so choose. If not, well, just thank you for watching.